Shifting focus now, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine has exacerbated the food crisis on this continent. Many countries in southern Africa rely on Russia and Ukraine for wheat and vegetable oils. But the war has disrupted global commodities and trading to Africa. Now, concerns have been raised of possible riots in many countries due to looming food shortages. To discuss this further, I'm joined now by Judy Smith-Hohn, who is Research Director at Tutwa Consulting Group. Good evening, and thank you for talking to me, Judy. So I must confess that until recently, I didn't know how integral Ukraine is to the global food supply. And the more I read, the more I realize that, even the World Food Programme and other aid agencies rely on supplies coming from Ukraine and Russia, in fact, from both of them. But now you have assessed the situation as Tutwa Consulting as it will impact particularly South and Southern Africa. What's your assessment of how that will come into play?
Good evening, Tulasizwe. Thanks for inviting me. Yes, you're right. Ukraine and Russia are the agricultural powerhouses, really, of the world, and many weren't quite aware of exactly how much impact it was going to have. If you look at the numbers, 25 African countries export more than a third of their wheat supply from both those countries combined. Now, in terms of the risk that we spoke of, UNCTAD had done a study where they looked at historical data and the impact that crises like rising food spikes have on crises, and they've showed that there is a definite correlation between, for example, in the case of the Arab Spring, you had spikes in food prices, and there was certainly a correlation there. And I think in places like Africa, where you already have these threats, there are already a significant portion of people living in poverty. You have a significant portion of people already undernourished, and then you have these socioeconomic stresses. It's not something to ignore.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like it's a coming together of the perfect storm in a way, in that there are certain conditions that are, endemic in the various countries, but also now this is the added stressor that is being added to it. So what do you believe will be the likely, fallout from these pressures, particularly as they manifest around food insecurity on already stressed out populations?
Yeah, you said the right phrase, a perfect storm. So there's also 25 economies on the continent that are affected by this perfect storm of food shocks, energy shocks, and financial shocks. And any one of those things could completely disrupt an economy. In terms of food security, I think that unfortunately what tends to be happening now is that people and countries tend to be looking more inward, and when in fact we should be looking, especially for the developing countries, there's much more of a call to encourage collaboration. There needs to be a global solution. You can't simply have a country solution to resolving any of these crises.
And Judy, what do you believe will be the boiling over? How do you believe it will manifest? Do you believe that it will be in the form of widespread protests? And are you able to map out which countries are likely to experience these kinds of protests? And are they comparable at all to what we saw happening in South Africa in July last year?
So, the difficulty is, of course, always predicting the future, because I'm likely to be wrong if I would put a list of countries together. So I do think that we have to be, there are certain countries that are more at risk than others, and those are those countries that are already under duress, under severe stress. Zimbabwe could be one of them. Countries that have a history of violent protests, for example. And I think here our country also falls under that category. So I think one would have to look at it more closely. It's still very early days, but I think there's a lot of there certainly is a call for a concerted focus on particular countries, particularly on the continent, that require additional support.
Yeah. Lastly, and very quickly then, Judy, how should governments and other stakeholders hearing you and the work that you've done at Tutwa Consulting Group, how should they respond to it? What should be among the key responses to this message?
Well, certainly a very straightforward response would be a move towards collaborating very, very closely in setting up structures and mechanisms to address the impending food crisis. And, if you think about the heat wave that we've just seen being reported in India in many parts, that's going to put in even more of a strain on food security.
All right, I've got to thank you for your time and your insights here on ENCA this evening. That's Judy Smith-Hohn, who is Research Director at the Tutwa Consulting Group. I did check with her before the interview that, I will do my best with her surname, and if I do get it wrong, I do apologize to Judy there.